Hello, my conspiracy of ravens. Welcome back. If you haven't noticed, I'm in a new space. If you didn't watch my last video, I mentioned that I was moving, and so this is my new apartment, or just a piece of it. I'm in my bedroom, obviously. I am planning to redecorate my video filming space. So this is not really where I want to record all my videos, but it is for now until I get that space all together, and I'm really excited about that. Anyways, today I wanted to do a fun little video on the new TV show Wednesday that dropped on Netflix last month, and it's based on the Addams Family. So of course we're going to do a deep dive into Addams Family lore and see how Wednesday holds up in the Addams Family canon. But first, a word from our sponsor. Thank you, Rhino Shield, for sponsoring this video. Rhino Shield is known for creating super protective and customizable phone cases and accessories. Rhino Shield offers tons of customization options, case styles, colors, print designs, you name it. So you can create a case that feels fully you. And they offer screen protectors so you can get 360 protection, as well as grips, which you can customize too. And they also have fun design collaborations with cool brands. I'm actually a big Peanuts comics fan. I've collected the comics since I was a kid, so I was like, yes, I have to get some cases from their Snoopy collaboration. You can also get a MagSafe compatible case, which are 2 times the strength of Apple's official MagSafe products. One of the best things that Rhino Shield offers, in my opinion, is a lifetime replacement warranty for their cases, which are available for all iPhones and a lot of Android flagship devices. Click on the link in my description and use the code MIALE to get 20% off your case in the first week and 10% after. So I want to start with a history bit because I think to really understand my POV, we have to go into what the Addams Family is all about. So the Addams Family was created by cartoonist Charles Addams, making their first appearance in a comic panel in The New Yorker in 1938. Charles, who also signed his name as Chaz under his little illustrations, made $85 from this cartoon, which is about $1,797 today. So what's the inspiration behind this cartoon family? Well, Charles himself was born in 1917 in a loving New Jersey home. He once told Linda H. Davis, who's the author of Charles Addams, Our Cartoonist Life, "It would be more interesting, perhaps, if I had a ghastly childhood, chained to an iron bed and thrown a can of Alpo every day. But I'm one of those strange people who actually had a happy childhood." But despite this, he did love the macabre, of course, which, according to Cambridge Dictionary, is a word used to describe something that is very strange and unpleasant because it is connected with death or violence. For example, Charles decorated his apartment with medieval working crossbows, and for his coffee table, he used a Civil War-era embalming table. Davis explains the table still had the rusted metal headrest attached at one end, and Charles loved to point out a mysterious stain that would be around the kidney area of a person laying on it. Let me know how you would feel if you were a guest at Charles Addams' house and he just puts your tea and cookies on this embalming table. He ended up going to New York City's Grand Central School of Art, sold a cartoon to The New Yorker in 1932, which was a sketch of a window washer, and it only went up from there. Davis explains Addams is one of those rare people who made a living throughout his entire life in the arts. He was with The New Yorker until the end, and it afforded him a glamorous, sophisticated lifestyle. He wasn't filthy rich, but he had an apartment overlooking the MoMA sculpture garden, drove a Bugatti and a Bentley, dated Jackie Kennedy not long after the assassination, and was always at the top of everyone's dinner party list. To be honest, I feel like Charles Addams is literally, or was literally, living my dream life. He allegedly proposed to Jackie Kennedy, which she rejected, allegedly telling him, "Well, I couldn't marry you. What would we talk about at the end of the day? Cartoons?" So yes, Addams drew a lot. He worked for TV Guide. He also retouched crime scene photos for True Detective. Over the course of his life, he drew about 1,300 New Yorker cartoons, and only 50 of them were featuring the Addams Family. And this family wasn't even called the Addams Family at the time. The name was solidified later when the comic panel was picked up for a TV show in 1964. The humor depicted in these comic panels could be described as black humor today, which, according to Cambridge Dictionary, is defined as a humorous way of looking at or treating something that is serious or sad. The idea of black humor was partially inspired by Sigmund Freud's 1927 Der Humor, in which Freud discusses a criminal who is led to the gallows on a Monday and exclaims, "What a way to start the week!" Freud uses the term gallows humor and explains that it is a tool to overcome a hopeless situation by asserting control over it. Gallows humor is the ego's refusal to confront reality. As an example of this, Davis told NPR that Charles Addams was actually a very fearful person.
He was fearful as a child. He was very claustrophobic. And he struggled with that fear all his life. He had a fear of snakes, and so he drew them constantly in his cartoons, these enormous snakes that were about 20 feet long. And it was the most psychologically smart thing to do, because by drawing out his fears and by making fun of them, he diffused them.
By the 1960s, when the Addams Family TV show premiered, black humor was everywhere. Black humor spoke to the ills of society, and with the threat of the bomb, the escalation of the Vietnam War, and the societal unrest in the US, it's no wonder that the 60s was a breeding ground for this type of comedy. And as I said before, the Addams Family originally were nameless in the comics in The New Yorker. So after the show was greenlit, Charles suggested the names Rapelli and Gomez for the father figure, preferring Rapelli, which was a wordplay for the term repellent, but he ultimately left the decision to John Astin, who would play the character in the show. Obviously, we know that John went with Gomez. Charles also pitched Pubert for the son, but network censors thought it was too risque because it was clearly a play on the word puberty. So instead, he named him Pugsley after a stream in the Bronx. The movie Addams Family Values does reference this by naming the newborn addition to the family Pubert. Morticia was named after a mortician, but there's also a myth that goes around that she was based on Charles's first wife, Barbara Jean Day, because they look a little bit alike. But the reality is he met Barbara in 1942 and first drafted up Morticia in 1933. The photo of him allegedly sketching Barbara in his living room was staged for Life magazine. If anything, it's just a coincidence that not just Barbara, but all three of his wives resembled Morticia in some way. He even told People magazine, "I married a woman who looks like Morticia. She's my ideal." As for Wednesday, the story goes that Charles met up with actress Joan Blake for a drink at PJ Clark's bar in Manhattan. He had no idea what he was going to name this 13-year-old daughter that he draws in his comic panels. Blake suggested that he name her Wednesday after the 19th century nursery rhyme Monday's Child. In 2018, she recalled, "He made me laugh and told me that the Addams Family was being made into a television show and that he had no name for the pallid little girl with the deadpan expression and signature pigtails. I said, Wednesday. Wednesday's child is full of woe." The Netflix show does make a reference to this name origin.
It comes from a line from my favorite nursery rhyme. Wednesday's child is full of woe.
For the 60s show, comedic writer, director, and series producer Nat Perrin dialed down the darkness of the comics and instead amped up the family's zaniness and insanity. For example, Cousin It and Thing, the two strangest characters in the Addams Family universe, I'd argue, were actually not prominent characters in the comics, but became prominent characters in the show. And fun fact, the actor who played Cousin It, Felix Silla, noted in 2014, "All the guys on the set smoked. They just dropped their butts and stepped on them. The producers worried that I might step on a smoldering cigarette and go up in flames, so they gave me a flame-retardant synthetic hair." As for what Charles thought about the 60s show, Davis says, Charles was up and down on the television show. He certainly enjoyed what the Addams Family did for his earning power, but he said the characters were half as evil. To be honest, he didn't even really watch it, because on Friday nights he was usually out to dinner or on a date. The Addams Family TV show was part of a wave of magicoms, which was like a genre name, a genre portmanteau, merging the family sitcom with magical fantasy iconography. These included The Munsters, Bewitched, and I Dreamed of Jeannie. While most domestic sitcoms of this era, idealized the white picket fence, American, nuclear family, middle-class culture, the Magicom subverted the idea of suburban conformity. The Addams Family challenged middle-class suburbia, criticizing it for its lack of tolerance and individuality. In the show, the Addams view themselves as the normal ones, and it's everyone else in their community who views them as strange. But despite their objective abnormality, the audience is supposed to root for them against the rest of society. For example, in the episode Morticia and the Psychiatrist, Gomez and Morticia consult an expert because their son Pugsley is exhibiting unnatural behavior. This unnatural behavior is actually normal boy behavior, aka he's prancing around the house in a Boy Scouts uniform, and he's opting to play with a puppy rather than with his octopus, Aristotle.
Gomez! What is it? He's out there, playing with it.
These personality changes are considered wrong, and throughout the entire episode, Morticia and Gomez are struggling to find a way to revert their son back to his authentic self. At the same time, this is the 1960s, so the Addams family does conform a little bit, to a degree, to the predominant ideas of suburbia at the time. For example, Morticia and Gomez are extremely nurturing and extremely supportive parents. They're also very monogamous and devoted to each other. You could even argue that they're a little too devoted for what was considered normal on television.
Saved for special occasions. Boobula?
Well, you know what you do when you call me that.
Well, it just slipped out.
The important thing is, Gomez was not this Casanova, and Morticia was still doing these housewifely chores like knitting garments and feeding the plants. The TV show was canceled after 2 years and 64 episodes, but there were attempts relatively soon after to revive the franchise. For example, the family took a guest spot in the new Scooby-Doo movies in 1972 because, I don't know, Scooby-Doo featured a lot of crossovers. Like, I remember Batman and Robin were in Scooby-Doo, Johnny Bravo was in Scooby-Doo, so yeah, I guess it makes sense that the Addams family would also just turn up animated in Scooby-Doo. The success of this crossover special actually led Hanna-Barbera to produce a cartoon series called The Addams Family in 1973. The show follows the family on a cross-country road trip in a camper van that resembles their home. Because it was the 70s, and everyone for some reason had a camper van in the 70s. And fun fact, 10-year-old Jodie Foster voiced Pugsley in the TV show. Also in 1973, ABC made a pilot for a variety show version of The Addams Family with a completely different cast, but in the end, the pilot was aired as a special and didn't become a full series. Then in 1977, most of the original cast reprised their roles in the movie Halloween with the New Addams Family. The Addams Family wouldn't come back until 1991 when director Barry Sonnenfeld directed a live-action adaptation called, of course, The Addams Family. For millennials and Zoomers, I feel like this adaptation is the most definitive and the first one that comes to mind when we think of this franchise. It was so successful, making $191 million worldwide in the box office on a $30 million budget, that Sonnenfeld directed the sequel in 1993 called Addams Family Values. I haven't seen the 70s versions of the Addams Family, but I do think the 90s one stays true to what was established in the 60s. Once again, we have the Addams in their dark Victorian mansion in the midst of a cookie-cutter suburban American neighborhood. And again, they participate in typical domestic activities, albeit in their own way. For example, the kids get sent off to school with bagged lunches filled with live creatures. Morticia still gardens, but in a greenhouse with blackened windows, and we see her cutting the flowers off the stems. But it has been upgraded because, you know, it's the 90s now, so Gomez and Morticia are able to be a little bit more sensual in front of the camera without the censors going crazy. They actually make a couple explicit jokes, which are funny watching back as an adult.
Last night you were unhinged. You were like some desperate howling demon.
And I think overall the movies set a darker tone, like the characters are more explicitly spooky.
1, 2.
Children, what are you doing in there?
Playing.
Wednesday in particular is more overtly sinister, and I think that was a good thing overall because it is more true to what Charles Addams originally intended with his comics. After that, we get a series of flop adaptations, another animated TV series called The Addams Family in 1992, which lasted one season, the direct-to-video Addams Family Reunion in 1998 with a different cast, and the sitcom The New Addams Family also in 1998 that only lasted one season. The Addams Family starts making a comeback in the 2010s with a Broadway musical that got mixed reviews, and then finally in 2019, The Addams Family returned in the form of an animated movie that did get 45% on Rotten Tomatoes, but it made $203 million worldwide, which prompted a sequel in 2021. And in the good year of 2022, we got Wednesday, which came out last month, and which we will finally talk about. Warning, there will be spoilers ahead. I'm giving y'all like over a month to watch this show, so this is not my fault. So Wednesday premiered last month on Netflix, as I said, and became the third most popular English language TV series of all time with 752.52 million hours viewed, according to Deadline. So the thirst for the Addams Family is clearly strong. As a disclaimer, because I know some of you are going to be mad at me.
Some of y'all about to be real mad at me, but it must be said.
This is just my opinion. Like, please feel free to agree or disagree. I don't really care. I just enjoy analyzing and discussing the media that I watch. So that's what we're doing today. So for anyone who hasn't watched the show and is not planning to watch this show, it was produced by Tim Burton and he actually directed 4 of the episodes. The basic premise is that Wednesday Addams, the daughter of the Addams family, gets sent to a private boarding high school called Nevermore Academy, located in the small town Jericho. Nevermore is a school for outcasts, aka the term for fantastical creatures like sirens, gorgons, and werewolves. The slang term for humans in this show is normie. Morticia and Gomez, of course, were prominent alumni of the school, along with Edgar Allan Poe. And throughout the show, Wednesday deals with this complex where she feels like her parents, particularly Morticia, are trying to make her become copies of them. Because high school media loves like the whole "this is not my dream, Mom, this is yours" trope.
Throw away your dream. No, Dad. Throw away yours.
Morticia and Wednesday also have superpowers. Their power is that they get visions of a person's past and future when they come in contact with said person. The big mystery for this season is that there's some kind of creature roaming the woods and murdering students, and Wednesday basically turns into Nancy Drew trying to solve the crime herself. My overall impression was that it's a teen show. Like, a show about teenagers for teenagers versus Euphoria, which is a show about teenagers for adults. What I consider a teen show is a show that doesn't take itself too seriously, with a lot of like kind of cringy dialogue that's reminiscent of the CW.
You know, it's a small school and there wasn't much online about you. Oh, you know, you should really get on Insta, Snapchat, and TikTok.
And I'm not like against a teen show, you know, I can indulge. There are some plot holes that are there that I wish they just took a little bit more care patching up. For example, how was Wednesday able to just sidestep the whole throwing piranhas in a pool and permanently maiming a student without getting sued? I would love to know. They could easily have just like put in a thing about how her grandma hypnotized the administrator, because I remember the grandma character, who is not even seen in this movie, so justice for her, but the grandma character does like some like witchy stuff in the 90s versions. And to be fair, there's not a lot of things that make sense in any of the Addams Family franchise shows and movies, but the difference is I feel like all previous iterations of the Addams Family have been very camp. And when something is camp, I'm not really looking for answers, okay? But Wednesday is a show that takes itself seriously, so it's hard not to question some of the decisions. One decision I did really like, though, is to cast a Latina actress as Wednesday.
Wednesday is technically a Latina character, and that's never been represented. So for me, anytime that I have an opportunity to represent my community, I want that to be seen.
The original Addams Family were not ethnically identified by Charles Addams, but then, you know, when it became a TV show and John Astin chose Gomez for the name, it basically solidified at least Gomez Addams to have Hispanic ancestry. And in this show, Uncle Fester, who is canonically Gomez's brother, is played by Fred Armisen, who is half Venezuelan. So yeah, I did like the extra care in the casting, even with Uncle Fester, who is like this very ambiguous, like gray looking man. I think it's nice to have that kind of implication that he is still Latino. In saying that, I wish that they actually would have explored that more in the show itself. I assume that at least Gomez Addams has Mexican ancestry because Wednesday makes a reference to Dia de los Muertos.
Ours is in the living room. More seating for a year-long Dia de los Muertos.
But the only fact we know for sure about her family is that they had an ancestor from the 1600s whose name was Goody Adams. And Goody Adams lived in Jericho and had witchy superpowers. But then Morticia implies that the superpowers are from her side of the family, so I don't really know what's going on here. And also just like a historical pet peeve, as far as I know, Goody was not an actual name that was used in the 1600s. It was more of like a title because Goody was short for good wife. A woman of higher status would be addressed as mistress and a woman of lower status would be addressed as Goody. That's why there were so many goodies in these historical documents. It wasn't because they all had the same name. Jenna Ortega was really good, though. I'll give the series that. I heard that she trained herself to not blink while on screen, which, you know, I love the decision. Very impressive for sure. As for the other characters, my biggest problem with them is that they really don't have any kind of character development. I just didn't really care about any of the characters outside of the Addams family, except for maybe Principal Weems, who's played by Gwendolyn Christie. Also, fun fact, Weems is actually an original character. She appears in a comic panel as Miss Weems, who acts as the babysitter for the night in the panel. So that was a cute little Easter egg. But for the boys who take up way too much screen time, particularly Xavier and Tyler, I honestly could not give one shit about this love triangle. I have no idea why they even liked Wednesday. That's not really clear in the script, especially considering how often she just brushes them off and is just straight up mean to them.
What'd you see?
Who said I was ready to speak with you?
Damn, as soon as I walk through the door, I'm getting a 3rd degree.
I know there's been some discourse on TikTok about who's shipping who with who, and I wasn't really sold on Xavier, but I really could not stand Tyler, mostly because his actor kept doing this thing, like this Debbie Ryan smile, where he was like, kept making this expression. It just drove me crazy. I just couldn't stand it. For Enid also, who is another major character, I guess, she stays the same the whole time. Her biggest issue is her mom pressuring her about her werewolf transformation, which ends up happening at the end of the series, and it didn't even feel earned. It was just all very convenient. And even with Wednesday, who does get the most character development, is just kind of annoying in the show because she delivers these one-liners, these very snarky, sarcastic one-liners every 10 seconds, and it just grows old very quickly.
When I look at you, the following emojis come to mind. Rope, shovel, hole.
I get why they do it. Like, they're clearly building off of Christina Ricci's portrayal of Wednesday.
Oh, Wednesday's at that very special age when a girl has only one thing on her mind. Boys.
Homicide.
But the difference is, in the 90s movies, Christina Ricci was part of an ensemble cast, which means Wednesday was not the main character. She was just a side character that appeared every so often. And so the lines that she gives are just dropped in the script at various points, but are not overwhelming. And honestly, the plots are very unoriginal and they're just not very interesting. It's just very juvenile and how the normies versus outcasts rivalry is supposed to be a stand-in for, I guess, racism a la Zootopia.
Outcasts, freaks, monsters. Fill in your favorite marginalized group here.
I don't know, it just doesn't really go deep with the commentary. Clearly Wednesday does refer to Indigenous people and how they are oppressed by colonizers in the show, but I think it would have been interesting to see what her perspective and her reality growing up as a Latina outcast is versus, Enid, who grows up as a white outcast, or Bianca, who grows up as a black outcast. I think they just could have gone more. And what bothered me also is that I feel like the original Addams wouldn't care about being murderers, they are just kind of sinister. I don't think it would have been that big of a deal to the innate family that Gomez or Morticia had murdered a man out of passion. I would even go so far as to say that the setting they chose itself is not really conducive for an Addams family adaptation. Because first of all, Wednesday is removed from her family, when the whole point of the Addams family is that they are a family unit and it really dives into family dynamics. And also the Addams family is about creating this juxtaposition between them and the rest of society. So I actually think it would have been more interesting for Wednesday to go to a regular boarding school rather than one full of like weirdos. Because in theory, this entire school should be fucking weird. Like, all the students should be more like Wednesday. That's the reason why her parents sent her off to the school, so that she could be herself. Not so she could be forced into participating in regular school events that are just coded as gothic. Like the Poe Cup tournament is just basically a relay school team competition. And the only thing gothic about it is the name, which derives from Edgar Allan Poe, and the uniforms that they choose for themselves. But where's the creativity in that? Where's the macabre in that? Like, I think what would have been more fun and more realistic for a school like Nevermore is if they had a school-wide competition where students compete to build the most creative torture device or something, you know? Like, I would have liked them to push the envelope a little bit more in the gothic direction. And I would have preferred that if they were insistent on doing this like gothic academy, for the principal to also be cooler, because even though I did like Principal Weems somewhat, I felt she was just too preachy when it came to wanting everyone to fit in with the rest of society, because that's not the point of what the Addams Family is about. I think they were afraid of making this TV show too camp, but the problem is the Addams Family is camp. And Tim Burton is producing and directing some of the episodes, so why not just lean into that? I want the Beetlejuice version of Tim Burton to please stand up. I mean, I think just at the end of the day, everyone's lazy. Everyone doesn't want to take a risk when creating a new show or a new story. They feel like they have to slap some intellectual property on it so that they can guarantee streaming numbers. To be honest, I think if this was just like a regular fantasy high school show and the character was just like this gothic girl and it wasn't directly Addams Family related, I would have way less expectations for it and I probably would have enjoyed it more. But because that wouldn't make as much money, of course they're going to take the Addams Family and slap it on without taking the care to actually look into what the Addams Family is all about. So the costumes were designed by Colleen Atwood, and I love Colleen Atwood. She's worked on a ton of movies, including Memoirs of a Geisha, Chicago, Sweeney Todd. She definitely knows what she's doing. She's like a veteran costume designer. Love her. So let's start with Wednesday. Wednesday appears in the first episode in her iconic look, a black dress with a white collar and 2 braided pigtails. It's a bit more modernized compared to previous renditions. The collar is nice and pointed, the dress has a subtle print, and she's wearing platform shoes. I love this. I think it's very true to her character. It's not anachronistic. She looks straight up like she's in 2022. I also think it's just a really good idea to nod at her legacy straight from the beginning. It's kind of like, yes, we are acknowledging, we are establishing what has come before us, and we're gonna get ready to show you what awaits you now. The pointed collar also helps with establishing like an aesthetic severity in Wednesday's character, which Atwood said was purposeful. She noted how Jenna Ortega has a very angelic face, so she opted for more severe cuts rather than flowy ones to sharpen her up. Atwood says, Wednesday is an angular person in a sense that you never know what edge you're going to get when she slings one of her lines. It was just sort of a choice that way for that. When Wednesday is at Nevermore, she wears a gray and black striped uniform, the colorless version of the standard school uniform. I think that's great. No notes. Atwood told Variety how she went about it. She said, I wanted a gray and black stripe, but I didn't really like how they looked in the world, so I ended up having the stripes drawn and painted. We silk screened all her stripes, so we got something that was a softer variation on a stripe, which is a fun process as a designer to be able to do. She also told Harper's Bazaar the difficulty in working with black clothing because they tend to look flat when on screen, and she explained how she worked around it. If you take black and give it a little something so that under the lighting it becomes this richer black, it won't go into this dark hole. Morticia's dress, for instance, is all black, but I was playing around with this technique in all leather, and I twisted the dress so those side things take the solid black shape to another place and give it more life. And besides using black that was semi-reflective, I used black and white. There's almost no solid black that's used. If a character is in a black jacket, for instance, I pair it with a white shirt underneath, so you can see the sleeve peek out of the cuff so it's not just a blob of black on the room. As for Wednesday's day-to-day look, she mostly wears the same clothes over and over again, which I like because I don't think she's the fashion type of girl. For her wardrobe, Colleen said that she searched for 60s and 70s as well as contemporary items, and I think that's perfect. Wednesday's original look, even though she was around during the 1940s and 50s through the work of Charles Addams, her dress with the contrast collar is very reminiscent of mod dresses of the 60s. Personally though, if I was the costume designer, I would have gone for a more dark academia route for her, just because she is like an extremely smart girl. We see her speaking Italian and German. We see her writing on a typewriter and playing the cello. So yeah, I think like playing into that kind of academic quality in her wardrobe would be a cool way to update and modernize her look. Like maybe instead of this checkered vest and sports jacket, I would put her in a plain white shirt with a massive collar like the ones from Simone Rocha, or think Ganni or Kiki Vargas, or it doesn't have to be like a name brand either. Those are just examples for inspiration. But having her in something like that paired with a black cardigan or black blazer and slacks. I would also want to give her like Victorian mourning jewelry. Once again, it doesn't have to be real antiques. It could be replicas. But I think something like an antique locket that has human hair in it, or even one of those necklaces that are just made of human hair, or a ring that is made of someone's tooth. I did really like Wednesday's Raven dance dress, which was a vintage Alaya made of nylon material. This dress actually had some kind of brown tie-dye effect, apparently, which ended up working really well because it gave the black fabric more dimension, making it less flat on screen, which is a problem that we just talked about. Colleen Atwood did say she made some alterations, and I really hope that the team preserved the actual Alaya dress and didn't touch that, and they just made alterations to the replicas, because it would break my heart if they permanently modified an Alaya dress. It would just break my heart. And yes, I do mention that they made replicas because when Wednesday wears the dress during the scene, there's this Carrie tribute where red paint gets sprinkled all over the students and faculty. So they did have to make multiples of the costumes that were featured in that sequence because they had to do multiple takes. Atwood also changed the shape of some of the ruffles from the waist up so that Jenna Ortega, who is petite, wouldn't get swallowed by the fabric. She also changed the neckline because she said the original neckline was quote-unquote strangly. The only element I think clashes is the collared neckline. I know it's supposed to play an homage to her collared look, but to me it just throws off the dress, and I wish they just didn't do it. Enid is another character that gets a notable wardrobe. She is Wednesday's roommate, who is very girly, very colorful, and very outgoing. She mostly wears shades of pink and orange and lots of patterns. And I love how Atwood leaned in with the fuzzy textures like mohair and faux fur, which not only contrast heavily with Wednesday, but also hints at her werewolf identity. I honestly wouldn't change anything about Enid. I think she's dressed perfectly for her character. I think she looks like she's very much a high schooler, which is ideal. She's like the more realistic high school version of Jules from Euphoria season 1. But by far, my favorite costume character is, drumroll,
I'm blonde, I'm skinny, I'm rich,
Principal Weems, which should come as no surprise because I am a big Hollywood fan, old Hollywood fan, and Principal Weems' design was based on Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. You can definitely see the resemblance here, particularly in the vintage hairdo and the pistachio-colored suit. Atwood explained why she went for a suited-up look for Weems. I kind of went with the thought of the people that run those kind of schools. They're almost like politicians who work the world around them, so they have to present themselves in a business-like way. At the school, you have to come on like you know what you're doing. I think going the Hitchcock route was like really fun because it is different from the rest of the characters in the Addams family, but it's still spooky in the sense that Alfred Hitchcock directed horror films. I also think that she looks very balanced because Gwendoline Christie has this very strong presence. Most people associate her as Brienne of Tarth from Game of Thrones. But the stereotypical idea of these Hitchcock blondes is that they're very vulnerable. And I think this aesthetic mirrors Weems's interior personality really well because she can be both a very strong and powerful and authoritative, as well as very caring and kind and more vulnerable in how she's struggling with managing the school. So that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye. And don't forget to click on my link in the description. Use the code MINALE to get a Rhino Shield case today.